Okay, there we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Soul Empowerment. My name is David McLeod. I am your life mastery coach, and I'm here with my three delightful and amazing co-hosts, and I'll get them to introduce themselves in just a moment. But I want you to think first for just a moment about the comfort zone and what that means to you. Comfort zone, what is that? Because that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I came up with this quote. I said, the comfort zone is a great place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. Said no one ever. I thought that was pretty funny. Maybe other people don't think it's quite that funny, but anyway. So before we get started, I just want to introduce myself. My name is David McLeod. I'm your life mastery coach. I am one of the people who does programs here on the Learn It Live platform, at the Wellness Universe portion of the Learn It Live platform. And this program is called Soul Empowerment. And believe it or not, this is our 70th episode. And considering we only do it once a month, that's pretty impressive. So I'm really excited. We're getting close to completing 6 years of doing these programs, and that's pretty amazing. So without any further chit chat on my part, I'm going to ask all my beautiful co-hosts to introduce themselves. And today, Scott, I'm going to start with you, and I'll use my usual approach. Who are you? What do you do? And where do you live? And why are you doing what you do?
Hey, I am Scott Holmes. I'm just south of Boston. I empower professional men and women to find themselves. Quite a concept. I thought I found myself years ago and realized I was lost. So I help people find that journey within themselves and enjoy doing it on such a level. And I pass this on to Gail.
Okay, beautiful.
All right. We're passing batons. I love it. Hello, everybody. I am Gail Nowak, and I am just north of Boston, and I help spirit-led coaches and holistic practitioners turn the discomfort of being seen into a catalyst for their deepest healing and most magnetic visibility. And I'm excited about today. I believe discomfort is often a doorway to growth. And the moment we stop avoiding it, our true voice starts leading the way. And that's why this conversation about being allergic to discomfort and breaking out of that comfort zone feels so alive for me right now. So I also want to just put out there, I invite you who's listening live or catching the replay of this, if this conversation speaks to you, to really explore it more and reach out to any one of us where you feel some resonance. And the best way to connect with me is at gailnowak.com. And Sarah, on to you.
Thank you, Gail. I'm Sarah Jane. I'm in the UK, in a not so little place called Bournemouth on the south coast. Complementary health therapist, author, program host, and enjoy working with the energy techniques, specifically voice, toning, and supporting people to heal and connect with and heal their inner child, the traumatized, hurt sort of aspect of themselves. And I've discovered within my own journey that the happier my younger self has become, she's become more confident, and thus I have become more confident. Because 30 years ago, if you'd have said to me I would be able to do things like this, participate in books, stand up in front of a crowd and talk, or just stand in front of a load of people and speak light language as I did on Monday, I'd have laughed at you. But it just wouldn't have been possible. But that's what I do.
You know, it's amazing when I listen to the three of you talk, and I hear so many of the same threads that, you know, that we all seem to share. You know, Scott talking about discovering when he thought he had found out who he was, that maybe he was still lost. Or, you know, Sarah talking about not believing that 30 years ago, not believing where you might be today. I mean, I think we all have experienced those sorts of things. And Gail, with your work at helping people to become more visible, and which I think kind of relates to what we're talking about here, right? How many of us choose at some point in our lives, because we have been wounded or hurt, we choose maybe not to be seen. We choose to hide out. We choose to stay in the background, the old wallflower thing that we used to talk about when we were kids. And so I think a part of all of that really kind of wraps into this idea of, well, I'm not going to show up and be seen, because if I do so, people are going to judge me, and that makes me uncomfortable. This is the whole idea, I get uncomfortable when I'm the center of attention, even though secretly deep down inside, I really do want people to see me, And so that's what we're here to talk about today. This idea of discomfort. What is discomfort anyway? Gail, I know you have some pretty good perspectives on this idea. Why don't you talk about it a little bit? Tell us what you think discomfort really is.
Well, I love this pattern that I'm noticing with our shows and the themes, and then how it just shows up in my own life personally, either through direct experiences or even just, seeing content that sort of relates and touches on these things. And so literally this morning, I got like this barrage of communications from different places, different sources about uncertainty. And I was like, oh, okay, there's uncertainty sort of feels like this cousin or precursor to this discomfort thing, right? And we're living in this time of uncertainty. And one of the things that I saw was about how we make meaning about uncertainty and being uncomfortable. Like, what does that mean? Our mind just automatically goes there. So I really started thinking about this before our show, because yes, it's uncomfortable to be seen. Like you said, we worry about being judged. We worry about being rejected. We worry about getting hurt. We worry about hurting others, right? And the uncertainty of what will happen when we do the thing that we're uncomfortable about, we're creating meaning of that ahead of time before we're even having the experience. And so it's normal, number one, right? That's a normal process that our brain goes through. And we can be present with that. We can be aware of that. And we don't have to let that stop us from that growth or the potential of that growth. There was another thing that I saw that was part of that, what felt like communication from spirit. It was like, bring these ideas forward. So I'm excited to do that right now. There was something that I saw as I was just scrolling through on, the random Google headline feeds. And it was this headline that said, to be a better communicator, you have to have a better tolerance for discomfort.
Yeah.
And I was like, oof, that really landed for me, because I recently had an experience around some communication that felt really uncomfortable for me.
Right.
And my instinct in that moment was to move into self-preservation and defensiveness. And it really took some time and some space to get curious. There it is again. I bring it up every time to get curious of like, what is this really about? Like, how is this happening for me? How is this happening for the other person? And ultimately it got to a place where it was like, oh my gosh, actually, this is where the value and the juice and the transformation actually lies, is in leaning into this discomfort and this moment, this original conversation, but then I know there needs to be a follow-up conversation around this particular thing that was brought forward to me. So we get scared, but we don't have to let that fear stop us, is basically what I wanted to say with all of that. And hopefully we'll kind of get more into like, how can we work with that discomfort versus avoiding it or ignoring it?
Yeah, beautiful. You know, as you were talking, I'm seeing, yeah, people who have to, or don't have to, who are called for whatever reason to be in an environment where they're speaking in public. How many of us do that and don't get nervous? You know, I think the lack of nervousness is pretty rare. And I remember hearing somebody say at one time, um, you know, yes, you're going to get nervous, but don't worry about it. It just means you care. And I've always taken it that way now, ever since. My nervousness is telling me I care about what it is I'm about to say to people, and I think it's important, and I want to make sure that I deliver the message in the best possible way. And so, you know, maybe I'm putting a little bit pressure on myself with that, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, I think this is really, really important, and thank you for your share about discomfort. Sarah, what do you think? What's your perspective on discomfort?
Well, I'm going to take a different angle with this.
No, not
Because
really. Really?
because I was sort of thinking about the fact that I spent so many years in that comfort zone of people pleaser because I didn't know how to be. But how uncomfortable has it got to get for you to leave? So actually, you're comfortable in your discomfort
Right.
until you can't do it anymore. So it isn't really an allergy to discomfort. It's that is just how your life is. And you're almost in fear of trying anything different for fear of what will that change and could it make things worse? Because you are so worried about what other people think about you. And so yes, it's how bad in some people's lives has the discomfort got to get for them to say, okay, as scared as I am to step outside of my comfort zone, I'm going to do it. So that's another perspective because some people are comfortable in their discomfort.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. And what you were describing reminds me of the Anais Nin poem. I guess she had a poem at some point where she, and I'm going to mangle it. So I've done a search because I don't want to mangle this. It's such a beautiful quote. And she said, "And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom." And I think that's just such a beautiful quote. It really speaks to exactly what you're talking about there, Sarah. And I think you're right. You know, when we have certain levels of discomfort that occur in our world, but right now they're not as uncomfortable as some of the other ideas we have about those discomfort, right? And so if you stay stuck in your comfort zone for a long period of time, I think eventually you do reach that stage where the discomfort of being in the comfort zone reaches a certain point where you say, God, I got to get out of here, you know? So beautiful. Thank you for that, Sarah. Scott, what's your perspective on discomfort?
I go back to comfort zone and how to define it. My dad was in the service and we traveled every year. We were in a different place. So change was constant. So I, being the oldest, that's what I grew up with. My brother, who was the youngest, was 11 days old when my father got out of the Air Force, and we lived in the same house. My parents lived in the same house for 55 years. Now, they never really went more than a couple hours away from home. And my dad would always say, did all my traveling, don't need to travel anymore. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
Their comfort was being close to home and being there. I looked at that, having been raised all over the place, and that's what I knew and what I loved and what I yearned for. And they thought I was crazy because that's what I was looking for. And when all they wanted to do was settle on their back porch or backyard or in front of the television. So the comfort zone, I question whether discomfort is about change.
Hmm.
And how do we change it? If we change the word, our vernacular always changes. And sometimes words don't always describe fully how we feel. And I said, I love change. Now, my sister, who is very close to my mom, said, that's impossible. Nobody likes change. Well, they've lived in the same house for 30 plus years. They've both since retired. The same wallpaper that was on the walls when they moved into the house is still sitting on the walls in their house, and they choose not to change it, which is wonderful. But that's complacency. That is acceptance of what is, and I don't need to change. So when I look at discomfort, I don't look at change as discomfort anymore. I never truly did. When I went back and thought about all this that we were talking about, that's not my discomfort. That's not my discomfort. Change is, for me, is yes. I spent 30 years on the road as a road salesman. No day was ever the same. No, even if I went the same route, I saw different things. The weather was different. The people were different. Whatever was different. And I thrived in that. And I go back to my brother, who lived in the same house, grew up in the same house, moved one town over and has never moved since, who's been in the same job for 35 years, takes the same train every day to the same place and comes home the same time. And he is very, very, very happy, or at least content, doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that is a dichotomy of who I am and what I do, because I need to have that change. So how we describe comfort and discomfort. When I challenged my brother, his wife wants to go to Europe, and I said, let's go. And he's like, no, I don't think I can do that. Nope. I couldn't take a flight. Well, it's only 6 hours. 6 hours on a plane? Oh my goodness, how could I ever do that? So there is a unwillingness to become uncomfortable. And I would define him as truly allergic to discomfort.
Well, yeah, interestingly, as I'm hearing you speak, I'm thinking, well, we all have different levels of interest in different things, right?
Yep.
What might be uncomfortable to you might be totally comfortable to somebody else. And to take an extreme example, think about, well, speaking of extreme, think about people who do like extreme cycling or extreme snowboarding or any of that other kind of weird stuff. I mean, I'd never do that because I'd be worried about killing myself. But I'm amazed when I watch some of these people and some of the things they do, and it just feels so smooth and natural. Or maybe you've seen videos on YouTube of people doing these crazy mountain bike routes where they seem to be going at like 90 miles an hour down the hill. And I'm thinking, oh my God, somebody's going to die here. Well, for those people doing that stuff, I'm sure they didn't one day wake up and say, I'm going to ride my bike down the mountain. You know, I'm sure they started off much lower on, very small hills, just biking, maybe trying a few tricks here and there. And each day they were basically expanding their comfort zone. That's what they were doing, Now, these same people who do that sort of thing might be extremely uncomfortable talking with us about deep soul work, And I'm not going to say anybody's right or wrong here. We all have our own levels of comfort, and certain things are going to have a fear impact on us more than other things will. And I think we all tend to react to fear pretty much the same way. We tend to either close down or we run away. Those are the kinds of response that we tend to have. So the question really comes down to, coming back to that quote by Anais Nin, at what point does it become too uncomfortable staying tight in that bud? At what point do you finally say, wow, I can't breathe anymore. I have to do something different. I think this is just such an amazing conversation. And the idea, we've been talking about discomfort, but is discomfort the same as danger? Well, it might be. There might be a relationship with danger. But oftentimes, the danger is just up here. You know, it's completely fabricated in our mind. And how many times have you had an opportunity to do something and you make up this story and you don't do it because your mind is telling you it's too dangerous? I think that's a powerful question for all of us to think about. I've certainly had my share of that in my life, you know. Well, I'm going to stop talking now and let someone else chime in.
Danger. When I started to find myself and I'd been stopped from doing so many things because of my fear of what other people thought. And one of the first things I actually did was abseil off the water tower in the town next to the Island Pool. And my mother's reaction when I told her was, "You can't do that." It was just like, "Yes, I can." And then I sort of went and started working with the wolves, the UK Wolf Conservation Trust, and became a trainee handler, and found out about a project to Romania to track wolves and lynx in the Carpathians for 2 weeks. And I went and did that. And I've flown a helicopter. I know you're a fighter pilot. You've been a fighter pilot, David. I've done a zip wire, a mile-long zip wire. I've done a wing walk. Challenge yourself. If something feels you'd like to do it, you'd like to try it, because if you don't ever try it, you will never know. I'm pleased I've done the wing walk. I wouldn't do it again because I was up there for about 13 minutes and it felt like a lifetime. I didn't expect to be up there that long, but I've done it.
Right.
And yeah, I'm having that pleasure of being up close and personal with the wolves. You know, the tracking in the mountains, not to harm the wolves. I'd never do all the lynx. I would never do that. But to get to do these things, is that stepping outside your comfort zone, or is that just a challenge, an experience you give yourself? And going to Romania, I didn't know any other people on that. And so that was a time where it didn't matter how I was. I could be me. I could let go of all that people pleasing. I mean, it was still there. It was still so deeply ingrained, but it wasn't as bad. And I was able to be more me. So when you're amongst a group of strangers, just go for the flow, be yourself.
Right.
So was that uncomfortable? Yeah, there were aspects of it that were, because it was a challenge. But then challenges are meant to stretch you. They're not meant to be easy. They're not a challenge if they're easy. So we can, yes. So when I started to say no to my old life and yes to my new life, I started letting myself be open to doing different things. I've climbed the 3 highest peaks in the UK, you know, sort of, and challenge yourself and get the pleasure of the achievement. It really does wonders for you when you can say, I've done these things. It's not boasting. It's not anything like that. It's just you having challenged yourself.
Yeah. First of all, it's beautiful that you've done all those things. I think that's fantastic. But you know what? I've noticed this, that I've experienced this myself in my own life, and I've noticed it with other people. Oftentimes, people interpret the idea of discomfort as just being something they do physically, like some of the things that you just described, or, you know, I don't know. There's all kinds of things that we can do that involve the physical body. In other words, dealing with the fear of dying or something along that line, you know, facing that kind of fear. And that's a big deal for sure. But there's many other ways to experience the transcendence of discomfort, if you like. And, you know, Gail, you were talking about just trying to show up as a human being with people around you. Like, how much more uncomfortable is it for you to take a zip line down a mountain, or to stand in front of 10 people and tell your story openly and authentically and vulnerably? Which one of those do you think is more difficult in terms of discomfort? I know for me, it's the latter one, standing
Yeah.
on stage and telling my story.
For me, 100%. I
Right.
had no problem hopping into a NASCAR and getting on Atlanta Motor Speedway, still feeling scared and nervous and everything, and you know, in a controlled and safe environment, of course.
Right.
And Sarah, Scott, David, you're bringing forward some really important distinctions too about desire being a piece of this equation,
Mhm.
right? Like my desire to have that experience of driving in a race car was greater than my fear
Right.
and greater than my discomfort. And I also trusted, I trusted myself, and I trusted the people who were guiding us through that experience, right? And so these are all important pieces to expanding your comfort zone too, right? Is what is my desire to do this? Scott, your brother maybe has no desire to travel, no desire to go to Europe, and that's not right, wrong, or anything. It just is. It just is. Whereas your desire, my desire to travel to different places, it's greater than, I don't like to fly, but I'm not going to let that stop me. And I'm going to do what I need to do to take care of myself in that process. When it came time for me to share my story, first of all, I spent months avoiding that, even though the universe was knocking on my door saying, you need to tell this story. You need to tell this
Well,
story.
how about all the years before you
And
actually
all
started
the years
thinking about
before. Exactly. Or the first moment where I actually came forward and disclosed the truth of what was going on in my household? Terrifying. But the discomfort of having to live with also a terrifying experience was my desire for some sort of change or resolution was greater than that fear. And so I think that this desire piece, and the discomfort piece, is it really discomfort if you're comfortable and you have no desire to change it?
Right.
Are you just content? Right? But if you're uncomfortable and you have a different desire, that's time to get curious.
Mhm.
Right? I had a desire to have different results in my business, which was making it, and I wasn't getting those results. And that was making me really uncomfortable. And that was pushing me, along with the messages that I was getting from my higher self or God or whatever you want to call it, to tell this story. My desire for a different outcome was the piece that I was able to hear and be with. Just enough. What do they call it? The faith of a mustard seed, or like 51% brave, just enough to be 51% brave and
Right.
and grow from that experience, even in the face of fear.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Scott.
I go back to sharing the story. So my wife has passed about a year and a half. We were married for 39 years. And I had just lost myself totally. Laura says, you need to talk to this lead author. It's called Himalaya Bora. And the book was Sacred Death. Talk about a neat title, right? Sacred Death. Now, I had lost my daughter and my wife, and she knew that I was close to it. And I had always wanted to write, but I was scared to death of it. So in writing the piece that I did for the collaboration, I was able to tell the story of my wife and daughter and what I went through, what we went through as a family, how everything went. And it was the very first time that I could tell my story in full, without emotion, without breaking down, without tears just welling up and overriding everything that I felt. And the biggest fear I had was not the millions of people that could read the story. It was for my immediate family, because I was scared to death that they would find out all the things that I was feeling, or that they would call me on something. Oh, that's not the way it happened. That's the fear I had. I had real fear about that.
Mm-hmm.
It took me a month to get through it. And I obsessed over every single word in that piece. Every single word. It was my very first piece, and I obsessed over it. And when it came out, I was kind of holding my breath. And then I got a call from a cousin of mine who was not around when I was going through everything, and said, "I'm really sorry, I didn't know." And I had other family members come to me and say, "I didn't realize that's what was going on." And so it was so much more or less fearful than I had anticipated. I had built this all up in my mind that people were going to call me and yell and scream and holler. No, they didn't. They came with compassion. They came with love. They came with understanding. And it changed my entire feeling about writing, about sharing who I was, about being able to use my voice. And that was the fear. I never feared walking into any room. Okay. I was a salesman for years. I could walk into any room. I could talk to anybody. I didn't care who they were, what they were, how much money they had. I could talk to them, but I could not share my story. That was my biggest fear, and how I had to pull that out of it. And ever since I told that first story, it's been coming out of me. Just the vulnerability, the understanding, it's been coming out of me so much easier, so much better, so much clearer. Gives me this platform with sharing it with the three of you has allowed me to just speak, because there's that acceptance, that understanding, that knowing you're part of my tribe, you're part of my family, the three of you. And it's a wonderful feeling. And when you asked me to come on, I was like, can I do this? Yes, I can do this, because you hold me in your space, you hold me dearly, and it really allows me to speak my truth, speak authentically, and it's such a gift. And I would challenge anybody out there listening, right, either live or otherwise, to challenge themselves to do that, to get very uncomfortable, because on the other side of discomfort is amazing, amazing parts of your life that you're just covering over right now.
Yeah, beautiful, Scott. Jean says, beautiful. That's so powerful, Scott. I love how conquering the fear of sharing leads to caring. Thank you. And it's true, as you were talking about your experience of writing, I remember when I wrote my first book by myself, it was a bit, I tried to be vulnerable in that book, but it wasn't really coming out to the degree that I think was necessary. And so the book itself feels quite intellectual, 320 pages of intellectual stuff about life mastery. Well, and after that, when I was invited to participate in some of these collaborations, and I thought, okay, I'm going to try and share my story a little more authentically. Man, I agree with you. It was hard writing a chapter of authentic vulnerability versus an entire book about a topic that I know a lot about. They're completely different experiences. And the other thing I've noticed is that now that I've now participated in, I think, 13 or 14 collaborations now, every time I notice more details of my story coming out, and coming out with a much higher quality of writing as well. That's something that has just come as just because I've been practicing. And it's kind of like, the guy who does the extreme bike riding. As I said, he didn't start at the top of the mountain. And we all have to learn to be gentle with ourselves as we're learning how to deal with our own discomfort, learning how to find our way to stretch our comfort zone so that we can become bigger and more amazing and more magnificent, one tiny little breath, one tiny little step at a time. And that's what this is really all about. That's what soul empowerment is all about. Sarah, you have something I can tell.
Just listening to this, we're all unique. We all know the things that we struggle with. For me, mostly that's technology. But we have. I don't think I've ever had the problem with sharing my story. Maybe because I've known it, if you like, for so many years, although I have no memories of it, and it's always been there. And I think it then was helped by that wake up, that light bulb of, why am I worrying about what other people are thinking about me when they're not? And the more you go through the learning and the growing that we've all done, it's other people's perception of you from their experiences. And that quote of, sort of, what other people think about you is none of your business. It is so true, but we're still in that mind space of, oh, have I said something wrong? If you have for somebody else, it's not necessarily your stuff. It's theirs. And can we step sufficiently out of the comfort zone of worry, because it can be a comfort zone of worry, to let go of that? Because we are all extremely caring people. We do what we do because we care. We've learned from our own experiences, our own healing journey, and we wish to share that to support others through theirs. But our wording, our terminology, our understanding of can be a different sense of words. And that's what I love about these shares, is that we come from different perspectives, from different experiences, from different understandings. The 6 and the 9, sort of, and you go the other side of that, and it's because my sister said it looks like 2 fish. Sort of, there's so many different ways for people to understand things. But by having this group talk, this group chat, hopefully we touch considerably more lives with our perceptions, our understandings, how we have grown from the story that is the basis of where we all started.
Yeah, right. I think there's so many beautiful pieces that are just kind of getting woven together here into this carpet, this tapestry, whatever it is you want to call it. But one thing that is really jumping out at me right now is this idea that discomfort. Well, first of all, we kind of touched on this earlier. Discomfort is not in itself danger, and discomfort isn't really pain either. It may not be something that you want to just jump into, for sure, but it isn't quite at the level of something that we would call pain, right? It's just something's nudging me. It's like maybe having a little, like the pee in the bed, the little pee in between the mattresses of the bed. You notice it because it's not what you really necessarily want there. So it can nudge you to do something. It can nudge you into action. It can have you start meditating and thinking about, okay, what is it that I really want in my life? What can I do now with this discomfort to expand and grow and learn and as Gail loves to say, be curious. So actually, Gail, talk to us more about being curious about this discomfort.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the princess and the pea analogy, because I agree with you that the discomfort it's information. It's providing us with some sort of information.
Yeah.
And I think even before we take action on that nudge, there's a pause. There's a learning to be with that discomfort, not to settle into the discomfort, but to be with it in order to have that curiosity. I think that well, okay, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I know that I don't like discomfort, right? Like I don't like conflict, for example. When my mom was transitioning, it was so uncomfortable to see her suffering. Like that for me, like that's my kryptonite. You
Hmm.
know, like this is vulnerable to say, but like thank God for my sister who was a little bit more able to be with the discomfort and the uncertainty, whereas I was like I just want her suffering to end. Like I just want it to stop, right? So we go to that place where we want to fix it, we want to make it better, we want the thing to stop. But if we can allow ourselves to be with the discomfort and not automatically go to a solution just to soothe ourselves, right? So in that moment I really had to I got the opportunity I got the opportunity to be in my discomfort long enough to make a good joint decision with my sister about my mother that was the highest and best for her, not me,
Right.
right? Because I just wanted it all to stop and go away. And I don't mean to sound cruel, but like, I, when we have pets and everything, and we have to make that decision for them sometimes, right? And we don't have that in our society with humans, but that's kind of where I was going. Like she's in so much pain, she's suffering so bad, like how can we end this for her? I know that might sound horrible, but that's really where I was. It brought me to my knees, and my sister was like, I'm not ready to make that choice. And so we had to have very open, honest, uncomfortable conversations. So yes, being curious, but also like taking that moment and being okay, like just naming it. Like I'm feeling really uncomfortable with this right now. It's
Right.
really like it's really hard for me to not want to fix this. It's really hard for me to watch somebody suffering. It's really hard for me to hear those words from you. Right? Like sometimes we just have to name where we're at and be with that discomfort before we can even get to that place of curiosity and give voice to what we're feeling. And then we can kind of go to the place of like, okay, actually in voicing it, I feel some relief around this. Now what? Now why is this happening for me? What might I be learning from here? Then we can move into that curiosity place and come from a more grounded and present energy about what's going on for us.
Beautiful. Love it. I had a similar experience when my mom was passing. I hadn't done any personal growth work yet. And I remember she was in the hospital in palliative care. Palliative care, I think, is just a euphemistic term for, and we're going to give her lots of drugs so she can die peacefully. That's basically what it means. And so my mom was in the hospital for about 3 weeks, and I was in her room every night. I was there every night and just being with her. And I was actually there when she actually died.
Hmm.
And I remember as she was passing, as she was dying, I just felt this huge release, this relief in my body. And I didn't have all the words that you have about understanding her suffering or any of that stuff. That wasn't there in my vocabulary at that time. And I honestly now believe that I have no idea whether someone else is really suffering or not. I can see facial expressions, and I can see the body contortions, and I can interpret that to mean there's some kind of pain or suffering going on, but I don't know unless the person tells me, you know? So one of the things I realized in that experience is I don't always know the journey that someone else is taking. There's no way for me to know it. Even if someone has a very short life, maybe they die after a year, maybe a little kid gets hit by a car and dies or something. And of course we have all our pain and everything else that goes along with this, the grief and so forth. But maybe that child's life was intended to be exactly that long for some purpose that we cannot quite fathom at this point. So sometimes we just have to open our hearts to the difficult realization that, okay, I have no idea what's really going on here, but I am open to just being accepting of what is so that I can deal with it in the best possible way. I don't know what else I can say about that. But the other thing I wanted to say is we're talking about discomfort and pain and all those other things that come together. Think about an oak tree. That oak tree, it could be 40, 50, 60 feet tall and nice and wide. It could be old. And yet it started out from a seed that's no bigger than this ring. How much growth did that tree have to go through to get to that stage? And what sorts of discomfort were necessary in order to get there? I mean, we all go through this kind of growth pattern, don't we? And then we get to a certain point and we say, that's it. I'm not growing any further than that. We stop. And even though the body might not necessarily grow any further, that doesn't mean that the soul and the spirit and the mind cannot grow further and become more expansive. We are truly, I believe, unlimited beings, even though we live in these temporary, limited physical bodies, So I'm just saying, open up to the possibilities, friends. Open up to the possibilities. Give yourself permission to be all that you were intended to be. Even if that means stepping up on stage and telling your story, or writing a chapter in a book, or sharing some poems, or writing some music, whatever it is, let that expression come forth, no matter how uncomfortable it might at first be. That's what I want to say. Thank you for your share, Gail. I really appreciate that. That was beautiful.
So it's interesting. A lot of times creation, the fear isn't in the creation, the fear is in the sharing of it, in judgment, and
Right.
that discomfort of, well, it's not really good. Or if you ask any 6-year-old, are you an artist? Every one of them will tell you, absolutely, I can draw. Talk to any 26-year-old, and very few draw.
Right.
So it's that growth or lack of growth, or being told in through society, through friends, oh, you're really not good at that. Well, when I wrote that first story, I wasn't very good. I took it my very first edit on that, and I have my next door neighbor is a retired English teacher. So I crafted this. I looked and I gave it to her and I said, okay, I need some help. And she said, okay. It came back and it looked like a coloring book with all the red in it, every edit. And I was absolutely devastated. I said, okay, it's what I asked for. So I went and I did all the changes. And you know what? She was right 99% of the time. And it really was better because of what she had done. And it was that fear of that discomfort that just okay. So when you were talking about creation, I know a lot of kids who doodle. They'll do other things. They'll actually, when you see the doodling, it's usually up their right arm or left arm, and nowadays anyway. But it's that creation isn't. It's about the judgment of others, and that's the fear that I had. And it's absolutely amazing when you look at discomfort and having had daughters and having lost my wife, that discomfort was always in their suffering. My allergy was to have them suffer. Now, I knew as a parent I couldn't take it all away, but I wanted to ameliorate it as much as I possibly could. I didn't want them to suffer. But as we all have said, each of us in our own way, there has to be suffering to be learning. And so I was stunting them from learning a lot until I allowed them to kind of go and grow. and they became much more well-rounded people than I would have had them if I had kept them in that very close encounter.
Beautiful. Now, you just said something that kind of got me react.
Good.
If you're not suffering, you're not learning. Now, I'm not sure if that's exactly what you said, but that's how I heard it. So I'm wondering, is that really true? Do you need to suffer in order to learn? I'm just going to put that back out there and just leave that as an open question.
Okay. Sometimes, yes, we do. But what's this wake-up call? What's this life quake we have to have in our lives to support us, to step outside our comfort zone, to get moving, to fight, to be part of the life we're here to have? So is it suffering or is it just discomfort? You know, it is something that pushes us beyond where we are comfortable. So whatever word you choose to use, and people will use different words. Was I suffering when I had this 6 months of pain and sleepless nights? You bet I was. And I was suffering physically, not emotionally and mentally, except for the fact I was totally and completely, utterly exhausted. But if I hadn't had that, would I still be stuck where I was? So Scott used the word suffering, but is it about discomfort, about being uncomfortable, about being pushed? Because so many of us have had to have that push, that bomb under us to make us move forward in our lives. So depending on the terminology you want to use, yes, suffering is a word you can use.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. My personal philosophy is I don't think suffering is ever necessary. I think it happens, and I think that we bring it upon ourselves, usually by our choices, not so much our choices to act or not act, but how the choices on how we choose to think about something, how we choose to frame what's happening in our world. I think more suffering happens between the ears than anywhere else in the body. That's my belief. And so suffering is kind of related to the whole ego mind thing. My soul is infinite and expansive and unlimited and really has no notion of suffering per se. Suffering doesn't exist on a spiritual level, I believe. That's just me. You may disagree. That's fine. I'm just saying that's how I see it. So I can easily experience suffering. All I got to do is think about it. It's that easy. I can create suffering in my life like by a snap of the fingers. The question is, how easy is it to stop suffering? Well, it's like anything else. When you start the engine of the mind going, you can stop it, but not necessarily on a dime, not necessarily by snapping your fingers. You might have to do some work. And in order to do that work, first you got to become aware of how much you're thinking about it, how much you're cogitating on it, how much you're dwelling on it, dwelling on the past. How many people live their entire lives in the past? Just always thinking about how it might have been. Or on the contrary, how many people just worry about what's going to happen 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes from a day from now, a year from now? And they just worry. How is that preparing you for anything? What happens when you shut off that worry and stop dwelling on the past and just come right here to the present? What happens? Well, all that stuff goes away. Suffering just magically disappears. It's amazing. And people have a name for that. They call it meditating, because you're trying to bring yourself into the present moment. So try it. See what happens. Maybe the meditation will help you reduce the story enough that you can see what's really true for you and step easily out of your comfort zone. Maybe that's what it takes. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to fly off to Europe if that's what somebody else wants to do. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to become an extreme cyclist. No, none of that is real. That's just something that might happen. So don't even dwell on that either. But just be true to who you are. That's the thing right there. True to who you are. There's nothing else that's more important. Scott, you got something else there. I can see it.
I just wanted to relate. The suffering artist. Our greatest artists have always said that they have had the most miserable lives. They suffered for their art, and so therein lies that rub.
Yeah,
Dale.
I mean, and I'm sure that they truly believe that was true for them. But again, I ask people to just take a step back and take a closer look at what is it? Are you really suffering, or is it just a story you're making up about the situation? Dale.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was going to say, the suffering is the human aspect. Whereas if we were going to translate that to the soul, my interpretation of that would be natural consequences, right? Cause and effect, universal law. Like we take an action and we get a result. And from the soul perspective, when we're looking at it as, I took this action, this is what happened, these are the natural consequences, we can kind of zoom out a little bit and break that suffering story, maybe not break it completely, right? But we can unattach from the suffering story enough to sort of get a different perspective of what's happening for us, right? We're often telling the story of what's happening to us, what they're doing to us, what the situation is doing to us. And, life mastery right behind you, David, right? This is a mastery type of skill to be able to step out of that very human response. And we're not judging the human response because we all do it. And we don't have to identify with it. There are plenty of people who, and I do happen to think that human condition of suffering can be a catalyst for change. But there are plenty of people who are in that human condition of suffering who are never going to change. Right. And so it really is about choices and desires and staying true to who you are and following your heart and being in the present moment and living. I think what we're talking about in this conversation is living, not only existing, living life, having experiences, learning things, learning more about who you are from the inside out versus what the outside is feeding you or deciding what you are or who you are.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Well, we're getting close to the top of the hour here. I want to thank you all for being here again, as usual. And as we close out, I'm going to ask each of you to share final words that you think that our audience will benefit from. I'm going to start with you, Sarah, because I know you've got to get going.
Think about yourself, your life, and you have choices. And are you making the choices that feel right for you, that resonate with you? And there will be those around you who don't like your choices. That's their stuff. Mm-hmm. If you are not hurting them, just do what is right for you. Because when we don't, we start to live in discomfort and potentially suffering. Mm-hmm. So when we're true to ourselves, and I've said no to people and they haven't liked it, but it's also given my family permission to start saying no themselves. Our no can give people permission to do exactly the same when we have the courage to be true to who we are.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Scott, closing words today?
As piggybacking what Sarah said, choice equals the results in your life. And getting a clarity in what those choices are, what they mean, and who you are, your authentic, being authentic to yourself, being closer to that makes things more comfortable while you walk through some discomfort to get there. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Gail, final words.
Yeah, I think it's going to be similar message, just different words to communicate the same concept. But really, I want to invite the audience to just get curious about where discomfort might actually be inviting you into deeper alignment with the truth of who you really are and your heart's desire.
Right. Beautiful. Yeah. Well, thank you all for being here. Gail, Sarah, and Scott, and also Jean, thank you for being here. Appreciate your input today. And thanks to you, audience members, for coming by and listening in. And if you're watching the recording, thank you for doing that. And please remember to subscribe on the channel and hit that notification bell. And I also just want to remind you that you can find recordings of this and every other episode on my website at yourlifemasterycoach.com. So with all that said, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to wish you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey. And we'll be back next month for